Recording.
Excellent. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Analyzing Swords and Boards with Squire Karps. I am Squire Karps. Our class is going to be focused on, sword and board. I'm sure, as most of you know, if you've ever stepped on a field in Belagarth and, recently, other than quarantine, there's a lot of sword and borders out there, right? Tons and tons of them. It seems to be, in a lot of areas, especially local to me, the meta. I think the most beautiful part about sword and board is all of the different variations of sword and board. I mean, when you say sword and board, what does that mean? Does it mean someone with a thing that can hit you and something that can block? So today what we're going to do is we're going to break down swords and boards, and we're going to talk about strategies that we can use in order to approach somebody. If you've never fought them before, you'll know tips and tricks in order to beat the person in front of you by analyzing their equipment. I'm going to dive into real quick a personal philosophy I have that stems, and it's not a new thing. I'm sure it existed before. It exists in a lot of different games. The concept is that if something is good in one area, there is a flaw in another area. Example with like Dungeons and Dragons would be like the barbarian class or something, right? Or fantasy stuff. We have these barbarians that are super strong, but they're not quite smart, right? Or the heavy armored dude is more cumbersome and doesn't move very well. It's a simple concept, and I'd like for us to kind of adopt that philosophy here. It's sort of like a rock, paper, scissors, or a combat triangle. And it's definitely not as clear as rock, paper, scissors. But for this class, the goal will be for you to be able to approach a situation similarly to rock, paper, scissors, and to go, hey, that scissors, I need to use paper and to know what paper is. Does that make sense to everybody? Another way that makes it click for me is Pokemon. I'm sure that people know what Pokemon is. If you don't, look it up. I'm sorry. But there's a very simple, something is super effective against something else, right? You see grass, you use fire, right? And that helps me too, is everything's kind of got a weakness and everything has its own benefit. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. I'm going to pull up my notes real quick. I only have an hour. Last time I taught this class, it was longer, so let's burn through it.
Well, you are the last class of the evening, so you can go as late as you wish.
I have a activity at 9. It's actually no worries. We'll see. We'll see. If you guys want it and we can't get through it, then I'm down to go further. Okay, so I've got here in my notes that there's a million ways to swing a sword, and there's no right way to do that. So even though I'm going to teach you, basically I'm going to teach you some opinion-based as well as some evidence to back it up. So just because I tell you that this is the way I do it doesn't mean it's the way to do it. There's plenty. You can kill someone without even thinking about it. Maybe you throw something that you never thrown before and you didn't know how to throw it, but you hit somebody with it. I'm just saying that there's no right way to do it. And even the most effective way isn't the right way, because it might not be the way you're having fun and enjoying it. So definitely take that into consideration when I'm teaching you guys these things today, that the right way is the way that you want it to be. But I'm going to teach you a pretty good way, all right? So I put, why do you want to learn this? Yeah, why do you want to listen to me ramble? So the thing is sword and boards everywhere. Oh, they're all the same. No, they're not. There's tons of variations, and the variations are a key to understand. So you're going to learn the advantages and disadvantages of things based on various things. We're not going to cover weapon as much because we have less time, but their shields are a really good way to approach this. So for weapons, we're going to cover length, weight, and type. And for shields, we're going to cover size, strapping, and core. We're not going to go too deep into analyzing the opponent based on things you can see. We're going to go more specifically on their gear set, specifically sword and shield. Cool. Does anybody have any questions on anything I've covered so far?
Nope.
No, it's all clear? Everybody? Rad.
Yep.
Rad, that's awesome. Okay. So going on with that philosophy, right, of I want to approach my opponent and see that they're using paper and then using rock, right? So rock's not always going to work. I want to prep you guys for that. rock isn't going to work all the time. It's more dynamic than that. So if you see paper, or sorry, if you see scissors and you throw out rock, sometimes their scissors are like really, really strong scissors, and they're going to actually break the rock. And what I mean by that is skill is often, or like experience and skill is going to be something that is going to play a large factor in these things. So just because you're using the right moves or you're approaching the situation the right way, this person might have been fighting for a really long time and understand what you're trying to do. So it's not that when you do one of these strategies and they don't work right away, it's because it's not refined and it's not like leveled up. If you throw something like my favorite shot's the reverse wrap. I love that. I even just did it by accident, but just by nature. But the first time I threw it, I didn't land it. The first time I threw it on a shield shape that blocked it easily. I threw it on somebody who maybe had a much heavy, we'll go into the weights, the sorts of stuff, but I didn't land it. And that doesn't mean that it wasn't the right thing to do in that moment. It was because it was unrefined. So even though this might be when you first approach the shield type and you're throwing these shots, if it doesn't land right away, keep with it. It's more about identifying and knowing better and better times as you do this. So it's a lot of going to be repetition when you approach the field that's going to help that. Okay, so my first thing here is that people do what they're good at often. So a lot of the times the people who have, if you have a shot, I bet everybody here has a shot that they prefer over other shots. And it's oftentimes because it's worked out for you a lot of the time. So what we're going to help do that, we're going to do is we're going to identify, we're going to be able to look at an opponent and go, hey, I think that they're going to do this more often based on their equipment. And I think that in my experience, I found that people do what they're good at. So their kit is going to grant them certain advantages, and they can become predictable because those advantages are going to be present and visible. But that also means that the more you approach these people, the more they've approached what their weaknesses are. So they're going to react to it. It gets a little bit complicated. So let's go over the basics here as far as, let's go into weapons first. I think weapons are a fun way to do it. So this is a debate. It's often been a debate in my area, and it definitely is. It is flat blade versus omni blade, right? Everyone has preference, but each one of them are going to grant some subtle advantages and disadvantages to each one. I think the most notable one is the ability to throw a flat wrap. So with a flat, does anybody know what not know what a flat wrap is? No, everyone has kind of an understanding.
Please tell me, what is a flat wrap?
Okay, so a flat wrap is kind of like, or a half wrap. I've heard it phrased this before. Basically, it's going to be like a wrap shot, but instead of going all the way, and like, let's say I was throwing for my flat blade, and I threw a wrap shot, and it connected to the back of the blade here, my shot would land on where the flat is. Does that make sense? So instead of it being a full wrap, it's going to be a flat wrap, or a half wrap is another common term for it. So the thing about flat blades is if you're not moving the position around, which I find most people don't do, unless they're more advanced fighters, you're going to predict that a flat blade isn't going to flat wrap you as often as a omni blade is going to flat wrap you. And that'll come up a little later, especially when we deal with shields. But that's going to be an immediate advantage where you can see somebody who's using an omnidirectional blade. And that actually might be something that you can identify when someone's using an omni, is this person might be flat wrapping more often. Now, what's an advantage of a flat wrap versus a regular wrap? It's more shallow of a shot. So when I throw a flat wrap, it doesn't go as deep, but it's actually a very quick shot. So this deep wrap's gonna wrap around typically. And it's not just over like the scorpion, it could be around, but it's gonna take more of a wider swing, and it's gonna potentially go deeper. And a flat wrap is going to be kind of a quicker point A to point B. but it means it doesn't go as deep. So it means that if you're fighting somebody, and this is maybe an assumption based on their kit, if you approach them and they're using a flat blade, in order for them to land those deep, the rep shots, they might have to be closer to you, or they might be slower on the delivery of those reps, and the option to a flat rep might not be available to them. So this is something to consider. An advantage to flat versus omni. Oh, does that clear for everybody? Do we have any questions on that?
Yes. What is the maximum length for a flat? Because Yeoman has some reach on his.
47.9 inches is max length for a blue, but you said for a flat weapon?
It's just the same.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
a red can be a flat blade. So there's not really a max length for a flat weapon, to answer your question.
Not a rule distinction.
Not in the
between
rules.
the two. Yeah.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions about identifying a flat versus an omni and what the capacity for the flat wrap might be? No? Okay, so the next thing is, let me check my notes real quick. I don't think we're gonna go too deep in here. We're gonna cover weight. Oh, let's cover weight on a weapon. So I like super light weapons, but I like super light weapons. Some people like very heavy weapons. And let's talk about ounces. So if we're going to identify like a light weapon versus a heavy weapon, might get some slack for this one, but I think a light weapon is going to be anywhere from 12 to 14 ounces. In my region, I think 14 is too high in a lot of people's hands to be considered light. They're definitely min-maxing in this. This sword is 13 ounces, and this is my downstick. But maybe a heavy weapon might be somewhere in the range of 14 to 16 in my area. There's an advantage and disadvantage to these things, though. A light weapon might be able to more quickly attack and then return. A lot of times, in reference to these weapons, a lot of the weight's going to be in the handle when they're using lighter weapons like that. So their return is going to become quicker, and their shots aren't going to necessarily have as much driving force from the sword itself. And a heavier weapon is going to be slower to return. However, it's going to have more driving force for the target. As far as this goes, it means when you approach a weapon that is heavier, you'll have to compensate potentially for your shield. So if you often set your guard to where it's slightly over the shoulder, if you're approaching somebody who's using a heavier sword, you compensate a little bit. That's just a very, very simple way to approach that. But let's say, how do I identify someone using a heavier sword versus a lighter sword? Because that's something that you can't really do very well if you just look at the sword, right? Not the same way you would approach a flat versus an omni situation. And there are a couple ways you can do this. First of which is the length of the weapon is going to play a factor in that. The longer the sword is, typically the more it's going to weigh and the more you'll have to compensate your shield for that. I think another way to do it more subtly is to see how your opponent is pulling their weapon back. And this is something that's going to require an eye. But if you see people throw their shot and then immediately come back in almost just like a straight line versus somebody throwing the shot and kind of dragging it back, it's going to be a very quick way, I think. Also, you can do it very subtly by baiting a shot to your shield or something and seeing how much your shield moves just on a basic swing on that. That's one way to identify. Easy way to identify also is ask them to see the sword. If this is a situation like a practice or something, socialize with people. And that's what I do. I talk to all my buddies about comparing kits and stuff, and we see the advantages and disadvantages. But if you don't have that luxury, those are some tips that you can use. The next thing you can do, the next reason why weapon weight is important is because of how it blocks shots. So a lighter weapon, if it's struck while it's in your hand, will not absorb as much of the impact. Well, I say maybe it'll absorb it, but a lighter one will move. So I wish I had a buddy here to kind of do it. But if I had a heavier sword and I had a lighter sword and someone struck me on the sword, my sword would be more inclined to move out of the way, which means if they were to throw a shot towards here, so let's say my arm or something, my block wouldn't necessarily absorb all of it. It might come through. So then if you are identifying a heavier weapon, you would, in that case, compensate by blocking out a little bit further. And if you're approaching a lighter weapon, then you don't have to compensate as much. In fact, you can actually utilize that to your bait in a lot of times. Let's quickly go over to length of weapons. This one I think is pretty self-explanatory. Oh, does anybody have any questions on this?
Nope.
No, I know I'm talking a little fast, but I'm keep looking at the clock. So the next thing we're gonna talk about is length of weapons. Something that's going to help you when you identify people, like yeoman, right? Queenie, you talked about yeoman, right?
Yes.
So yeoman probably tags a lot of legs quite often, I bet, or maybe higher shoulder, upper arm area is going to be a likely target for yeoman and his 47-inch blue sword.
But he's also super tall and lanky.
That is true. Probably gets them shoulder shots too. That 47-inch one, in fact, I have a 47-inch here. But much like red swords, the advantage of this is that I don't have to be very close to my opponent in order to hit them. And this is a crazy example, but you can typically tell the length of a weapon by looking at it. But that means that your opponent, especially based on depending on their height, is going to also be a factor here. But they're going to be able to outrange you. So in that case, you want to identify your opponent, the range of their weapon, and remember to not let them put you in the range that they want you to be in. And that's a hard thing to adapt because some of the times you want to be in that range. It's a safe range. But if you can, I've got some very tall fighters that fight alongside me or at my practice when we're fighting. They're 6'4" and they're using 38-inch bats sometimes. And it does feel intimidating to get closer to them. But if you see somebody using a longer bat, an advantage is to fight them at a range in which you can be sure that you can strike them. If you're fighting them at a range in which you can't hit them, then they're getting a bunch of free shots on you. Now, if you identify someone with a little tiny bat, I got one, I'm sure. Let's use this little one. This is a little tiny bat. So the opposite is true about somebody who's using a little tiny sword, is you have the opportunity now, if you outrange them in these situations, to put them at a range in which they can't necessarily touch you and you can have some free swings on them. And that's pretty simple on that one. Is anybody clear on short versus long weapons?
Do you think when it comes to short versus long, does longer have a disadvantage when short is in A range? Or do you think it's that big of a difference?
Kinda, sorta. So I don't think so. I think personally, I think the advantage is a weapon in which, is more versatile because you'll have more. I think it's less gimmicky, but gimmickier stuff really just means that there's an advantage somewhere. In my personal opinion, if you're using something as overly long or overly short, you're kind of stuck in what that's good at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking. Do you think short is better at up close and personal, and do you think long has a disadvantage in that area?
So yes, I think that's the case based on range. As an addition to your question, I think that if you can properly disengage with your opponent to put them at the appropriate range, then I think a longer bat is superior in that sense. But if it's a short range,
but you have to do a range change in order to do that. Yeah.
And thank you, Arjun. I actually have a example here, something that's a little more sciencey here. So a sword and how you swing it is a lever. And with just basic lever here is if my points is closer to the tip here, it's quicker. It takes less time for my lever to turn than if it's here. Does that make sense? So a lot of times when you're using a smaller bat, you actually have kind of a faster shot time in close range. So it's definitely an advantage in those things, just based on how quickly your weapon can hit your opponent. Not even just range, but because
you have like a higher DPS.
Yeah.
Well, or HPS, hits per whatever.
No, I got you. I'm picking up. I just got done playing MMO right now. My mind is in DTS mode too. So does anybody else have any questions based on lengths of weapons? Okay, I'm gonna check my notes real quick, but I'm actually exactly where I want to be because I kind of wanted to just glance over weapons. I want to focus more on the boards. So we can slow down a little bit now, which is awesome. So shields. Shields are awesome. I bet everybody has a preference. I know Argent has a preference. I've seen it. It's like a very specific shield. I think
Wankle.
Argent, right? Your Wankle that's got the edges on it, right? So Argent, I bet you had come to a point where you had tested the shield a little bit and you found that you liked it based on things that it granted you, and it worked with your fighting style, would you say?
I went to a Chaos Wars and I saw Alexi using it, and so I just thought it was cool and neat. And so when I got back from Chaos Wars, I just made one out of
Nice.
the foam mats, and yeah, I don't know, it just works with how I fight, and yeah, and it works well with down sticking as well. That was something I also really liked about it.
I agree. I think Wankle actually does, and we'll cover Wankle a little bit and why it's
Okay, cool.
a large advantage when it comes to downsticking. I wasn't going to explicitly cover it because I don't have a Wankle here, unfortunately.
I have one I just made. I can, if people want to.
You can be our buddy dummy here with our.
Yeah, I'll go grab it when you're ready.
Let's not do Wankle right now. Let's cover basic traits and qualities of a shield that's going to help us better identify a shield. So I think that the most notable one is to break shields into 2 categories, 3 categories, and then 2 more categories. And I'll feed you guys. Don't worry on this one. Okay, so the first categories we're going to do is based on strapping. We have a punch shield, and I'm sure you guys are familiar, especially if you're from California. There's lots and lots of punch shields in California. This is a punch shield. It's held like this, or I like to do them a little lower, but it's very simple. There's a handle. It's not strapped to your arm. I'm going to get into it, but this is something that we'll cover as far as advantages versus disadvantages. The other one, as far as strapping goes, is going to be a strap shield, something that is strapped to your arm. I'm sure you guys have all encountered that. So the next sort of identification that we're going to do for shields, I like to break into 3 categories because there's a special middle one that has just popped out, I think, and has become more and more relevant. Cord shields and coreless shields. For those of you, I'm sure you guys know what a core versus cord. When I'm talking about coreless shields, I'm talking about shields that are one piece of foam and don't have a rigid piece on the inside, such as plywood or, I guess, heavy plastics can be used. It's typically plywood that I see. But that's the other example, is a cord shield. I have one over there, but it's so heavy. I don't want to grab it off the rack. There's my bias. Do you guys see my bias right there? Yeah. So there's a second one right in the middle. Do you guys want to take a guess at what I think the middle ground between a cord shield and a cordless shield is?
Is it one made with a snow sled?
I would count those as being cord. They have like a semi-rigid plastic to them. But that's a good one. That's definitely an example of a shield, because that one's shaped too. That one's definitely something we can get into. Plastidip. Plastidip is something that has popped up, especially when you take a coreless, especially when it's made with a coreless shield, and you add a bunch of Plastidip on it, and typically your denser EVA foams, it changes the property of this coreless shield to being almost semi-cord. Because the properties here we're looking at is typically weight and density of the shield. There's definitely a more advanced bit when we're talking about how slick the shield is. We'll talk about shield manipulation. That's just a side note, though. Let's not go too deep into that. That's a rabbit hole. But yeah, so that's how I break down those 3 classifications there is, well, let's take from the top. Strapped, punch, cord, coreless, Plastidip. Now, the Plastidip could be also a shield that is coreless, but it is made with a very heavy cover fabric, such as like duck cloth or something. But that's the middle ground, okay? We're talking about a coreless but very heavy shield. Cool. The last of which is based on size. For ease, we're going to talk about large versus small. And to put it into perspective here, I'm not going too small versus too large. I'm going to use kind of a very basic example. This is kind of more of like a versatile shield. This is a 28 round. And on me, I'm 5'8", 5'9"-ish. And this I feel is an appropriate size shield for me for versatility's sake. It's not large, I would say, but it is certainly larger. This is like a middle ground, I would say. This is a 24-inch round. I find that this is a small shield. There's certainly little bucklers you can use, but for the example here, we're going to be using this shield as our example for being a small shield. And I am going to have to go get a big shield real quick.
When you have so many shields, you cause an
Holy
avalanche.
shit! How many you got over there?
The appropriate amount. That's how many.
Lots of
I'm not one to talk. I'm just wondering.
Well, to be fair now, there's no such thing as too many shields.
I gotta go
How many
bust out
Belligram
my
live in that
file.
house?
There's 19 of them here.
Oh wow!
That's a
Damn.
quick. Oh, I'm sorry. 20.
I was going to say there's got to be 20 there. Come on, man.
I got rookie numbers. Hey,
There's one.
need.
And I felt proud about my 6 shields I had.
Yeah.
There's two upstairs.
One.
Too. We've got 24 right here.
How
This
many
is
people
a
in your
large-
house fight though? And that's the question.
This is the example that we're going to use for a large shield. It's
Oh,
very
yeah,
large.
big
It's hard for me to
shields.
get in a camera, but for this example, this is like a heater shield. It pretty much covers my body completely. I could sink down to the ground and be covered by this shield completely. This is one of those examples you're talking about, Plastidip, but coreless shields. It doesn't quite, yeah, we'll get into that. But this is our third example of large. And the reason why we bring up sizes of shields is we're going to be talking about passive defense with shields. I like to call it active defense versus passive defense. It doesn't really make all that much sense to identify it that way, but it helps me remember that a certain type of shield will require an active defense, and a certain kind of shield will have a passive defense. The passive defense is, guess what, the larger shields. They have a lot more of a, passive defensive ability. So when you have a larger shield, what I mean by that is if someone were to pop out of nowhere and you didn't see them, but they're in front of you and they're swinging shots at you, there's going to be more of a likelihood that your shield is going to passively defend you against those shots. Versus something that was very small or smaller, that if someone were to pop out and you were unaware, this would passively not block as much. Does that make sense? So this is going to be a definition here of an active defense shield versus the larger one is going to be more of a passive defense shield. And the reason why this is important, well, I'll tell you why it's important. I'm going to check my guard really quick, or check my notes. A term that I like to use here is our static guard. So a larger, that's the better terminology right there. So our larger shield is going to grant us a higher static guard. So if it's not moving, it can block more than if this was right in front of us, it wouldn't block as much. Now, you look at me, well, why wouldn't you just use the bigger shield then? If it can block things better, right? Isn't that what a shield's supposed to do? Well, does anyone actually have that question? Does anyone want to? Well, okay, I'll tell you right now. The reason why is because, like I said before, some things that grant us advantages also grant us disadvantages in some situations. So, and I'm going to explain to you why active defense and passive defense aren't, having a high active defense isn't necessarily a good thing. And the reason why that is because it now takes away from your ability to attack your opponent. That's one thing. Because you're now actually creating kind of a shield for your opponent because you're going to have to fight around it. That sounds silly because everyone who has a large shield can still swing a sword, but it's now harder and you got to work against it a little bit. There's less shots typically available to you when you are using a larger shield. And if you're using a smaller shield on the flip side, the shield, you're not necessarily fighting against the shield anymore. The shield is placed in front of you or potentially behind you if you know you're turning around. But it doesn't have that active defense, but you also aren't fighting against your shield. You don't have to worry about when you throw a shot to a certain area. that you're going to be going through your shield. This can be adjusted through positioning on your body and learning better. But oftentimes what happens is, this is how you typically fight larger shields, is in order to get to your opponent, you have to remove some of your guard. Does that make sense? And what that means, and I'll show you what that is right here. If I'm fighting my opponent, hopefully you guys can see my back well-ish. Yes. If I'm fighting my opponent and I want to swing for them, my shield is typically going to come out more. And now this is excessive. This is no longer defending me. Does that make sense? There's a large part of my shield that now I've moved away from my body in order to open up to fight my opponent. And now it's just a large waste, in my opinion, in this specific situation of a shield. Because at this point, you're kind of overcompensating at this point. Your opponent has to fight really hard to get around this, but they might have to fight just as hard if the shield is closer to your body. And that's a disadvantage of using a larger shield, is now in order to fight your opponent, you're going to have to potentially move your shield, and therefore you're using an excessive amount of shield. The secondary option here that is a disadvantage of using a larger or a passive or static guard shield is that you now have lost the opportunity to bait your opponent actively. When you approach a large shield like this, there aren't very many open target areas. Does that make sense? So when your opponent approaches you, they have to go, man, where do I swing at this guy? Right? And you will have to go, well, there's nothing immediately available to me, so I'm going to have to open up the shield. I'm kind of going off a little bit, but that's kind of the long and short of a large shield, is you no longer have as much of an opportunity to do an active defense. Now, let's get into the smaller shield, because it's going to fill some holes in this, okay? So, smaller shield time. If I square up and I'm approaching somebody who has a smaller shield, now, when they square up to me, there's now a lot of different room, like open shots, right? And the more open shots I have means the more active capability I have for baiting my opponent, which means if I place this over here, there's a lot of my body. I can definitely move around and easily find targets for my opponent to think they've got on me, when in reality, you put it there. Does that make sense? And when you have a larger shield, and I'm going to show you why this is so much more obvious to your opponent and doesn't work as much using a larger shield. Because when I open up my guard, right, this looks very obvious that I'm trying to get my opponent to swing at this spot. Does that make sense to everybody? Or if I'm pulling down my shield, this is very obvious, right? Theoretically, I guess I could just drop it completely. But even then, just on a very passive guard with the small shield, you don't get that open baiting opportunity, which means your opponent isn't going to often swing at you with you knowing that that's where they were swinging. This is bait, and people know it. Now, this is not as much bait. Does that make sense? My shield doesn't, I'm covering over here, right? It looks like it does. I got to cover something. So it's more easy to get your opponent to swing at you, which can certainly be an advantage if you're the one who decided that they're swinging at that area. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, on the flip side to that, go ahead. Did somebody have a question?
No.
No, okay. So on the flip side of that is, that's if you were using the sword and shield, right? Now, what if you're, okay, yeah, so what if this is your opponent, right? What if you're trying to fight a small shield? Or what if you're trying to fight a large shield? What is the back and forth here? What's the extremes of how to get them to open up? And the answer here is bait is on one end of the spectrum and feint is on the other end of the spectrum. Is everybody pretty clear of what a bait versus a feint is? Do I have to, it's okay if I have to define them. Does anyone have a question on that?
I honestly wouldn't mind personally hearing the defining between the two.
Okay, cool. I'm down. I might have it written down. Let me check my notes. I don't think I do, but that's totally okay. Okay. So a feint is when you swing or you move your sword in a direction that is not what your swing is going to be. So if I were to move my sword here and then swing here, I'm feinting my opponent. I am, I'm basically lying. I'm lying. I'm going to throw over here, and then I throw somewhere else. This doesn't have to be this to this. It can be done as subtly as a pommel swoop. It can be done as subtly as dropping your guard just ever so slightly like this or something. Just basically lying about the shot that you're throwing to your opponent is a feint. Hopefully that was a good enough definition. Now, a bait is also lying. A bait is lying to your opponent and getting them to believe you about whether or not the target area that you have open is actually open. So I am, by revealing this part of my arm or my shoulder or something, right? I'm baiting this. I want my opponent to think that I don't know that this is open. And that, dude, honestly, feints and baits is a class all on itself. Vanson teaches a fantastic feints and baits class that was recorded at Shinar Collegium, which I'm sure that there's a link available to that. I definitely recommend that. But yeah, so the difference here is when you're fighting, and I'll tell you why this is relevant. When you are fighting a smaller shield, I recommend feinting your opponent. The reason why I recommend feinting your opponent is because the smaller and smaller your opponent's shield gets, the more they have to worry about getting hit. Does that make sense? So if I feint up here, they pretty much have to block it or get out of the way or they're gonna get hit. So a smaller shield with a less active guard will have to be receptive to a feint or they will die. That is not the case with a larger shield, and feints will typically work less often against a larger shield than a smaller shield. And the opposite is true with a large shield, or I guess it's the same concept, just in reverse. When you have a large shield and you want your opponent to get out of this shell, right? So now feinting is a better opportunity for you in these larger shields because now you want your opponent to swing at something and now you have the advantage because their shield just opened up. And this is often a time, especially if they're swinging, that they're unaware of what is opening up. So I would recommend baiting a larger shield to get them to open up because if you feint on them more often than you bait on them, they don't have to, it's not detrimental that they block this a lot of the times. This is an extreme. Let's go to the middle ground, right? So this is my 28 strat. I'm a big fan of this one, but it covers a lot of things. It's large enough to where I don't necessarily have to worry about everything, but if somebody swings to my shoulder, I definitely have to move it up a little bit, right? So this is one where you're going to be using more of a combination of feints and baits, depending on how your opponent is using their shield. If they're going to be more passive in their guard, or if they're responding, that's something that you're going to have to pay attention to, and not something that's going to be explicitly based on their equipment. Let's move on to the next one. I'm almost out of time, actually. Straps versus punches, and the differences between them and how you can take advantage of them. Let's go to punches. Firstly, how to identify on my opponent? Well, I should have said the size one you can tell by looking at it. As far as strapping is concerned, there are some ways that you can very easily identify that your opponent is using specific strapping without seeing the back of their shield. One, you could try to look at the back of their shield before they fight you, of course, but if you don't have eyes, poke it. Poke the shield, because this shield moves one way or the other for a punch shield. Sometimes they'll rest it on their arm and stuff. That's definitely something that's difficult. But a lot of times if they move it in front of them, it's going to be harder for them to hide the fact that this shield moves every which way. Does that make sense? You can also tell based on whether or not they're blocking far away. So if I'm using a punch shield or something, I can block way down here, or I can block way over here. And this is less likely going to happen with the strap shields. That's one way you can identify. But this is an easy way to identify that. On the other end, strap shields, they don't do that. If you stab them, they pretty much stay where they're at. This is going to change based a little bit on the core, which we'll get into when it comes to weight. But yeah, easily identifiable. It doesn't flip back and forth. That's something you can do just by simply approaching your opponent and stabbing them at a safe range to identify that. Punch shield's advantages are you're going to, like I said before, you're going to be able to go further on your body because it's not restricted to being on your arm. This can be anywhere. I put this right over here. I can put it on my leg. I can cover it on my foot over here if I want to. So an advantage of that is if you are being incredibly active with your guard, you can get those last minute blocks on things. But that also means that your opponent can. So approach them with the feint typically and see how far they're going to block. Strap shield's advantage, which you're going to have to watch out for. I actually think that this is one of the most advantages that a strap shield can have, is the level of control that you can have using a strap shield is higher. With the punch shield, if you were trying to grapple somebody, if you're trying to hook a shield, if you're trying to push a shield, the punch shield isn't going to be as easily manipulated by the user because it's going to go both ways. If the opponent can manipulate your shield as a punch shield, rock it back and forth, well, yeah, you're also going to be able to manipulate it back and forth. So if you were to like grapple or if you were to push, I have less experience pushing. I'm in Southern California. We don't really do that as often. I wish we did a little more. But strap shield is definitely going to grant you advantage. So if you see someone with a strap, remember that they have a lot of control over their shield. And if they do go for grapples and stuff, isn't something that is going to be, it's not going to be as easy to manipulate because of how strapped it is to your arm. Okay, does anybody have any questions on punch versus strap?
No, but if I have
Go.
some quickly add that on my agreeing with you, that's all
I'm
right.
about it. Go for it.
Particular. So when I was younger and first starting the sport, Stygia was really heavy with tower shields, right? And
right.
I was like, all right, how am I going to deal with this? So I found out a good way to go about, for myself personally, a good little snap combo is to, I'm right-handed, so we'll just go off that example. So if I'm looking at you right now, and you have your shield up, I'd be snapping up towards, I guess your upper left shoulder, snapping, put you there. I have a strap shield that I enjoy. I would use my strap shield, step in and hook that little brief opening you give me and wrench that shield out and then bring it around my arm all the way around to go against the side meats to the best of I can. And since
that's one of my favorites, yeah.
Right, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's one of my main ones.
I'm a fan. I actually switched to the strap shield. Not a lot of people in my area use strap shields, and I switched to it because I wanted to get better at shield manipulation and being a little bit more.
I am a shield
pushing
crazy
around
person.
So I'm a fan of it now. I used to not be a fan because I was always on the other end. But yeah, definitely cool aspects of a strap shield. We're going to briefly cover about the weight. Remember when I talked about the weight of the shields? Well, it kind of follows very similar as punch versus strap. And this kind of adds a little bit of depth to this because though it's very not often that you'll see a punch shield that's also a cord shield, typically people kind of double down on the weight shield. They'll be larger cord strap shields. It'll be very heavy. But you can use these combinations when you identify them to kind of better break them down. So like this one is a coreless strap shield, right? So not all those points aren't pushed into it being very heavy. And let's go over the weight of the shields. So there's another thing about using something or fighting something that you know to be light is that much like when we covered the swords, it's something that can be manipulated and moved around with heavier swings. I'm not saying slam people with your sword. I'm saying that if you are using something that is maybe on the heavier side, or even really if it's a really light shield, you can use a little additional force to blow through some guards that you wouldn't normally be able to if it was a larger shield or if it was a strap shield. Think of heavy and strap and core to be more on the side of security and immovability, and punch and coreless and small not necessarily as much, I guess, is something that can be easily manipulated. So your shots can be blown, you can blow through them where you might not be able to get your sword to go all the way through with something that is. So I would throw less shots that you feel confident landing if it were to go through their guard, if you're fighting something that is a strap shield, particularly one that's cord, or if it's a plastidip, I think is not necessarily it. Again, not the letter of the law there. Doesn't mean never try to blow through your opponent's guard, but those are situations where you can identify it and go, hey, maybe this isn't the best shot choice for me right now. In that case, instead of a heavy shield, focusing on blowing through their guard by throwing shots that are going to be a little more forceful, then you want to go to baiting. In this case, instead of blowing through the guard, you're moving the shield to a spot where it's now sufficient for you to land. Does anybody have any questions on weight and strapping and how they go kind of hand in hand? Pretty simple, right? I mean, it's really, we're just dealing with extremes here, but the important thing is to be able to identify these things and to be able to go up to your opponent and go, I know what I'm fighting. These are tactics that I can use in order to fight this opponent if I've never fought them before. So now we get to go to my favorite part, which is shield shapes and how they grant different advantages versus disadvantages based on your body. And I'm gonna take my tabard off for this one because it's much easier for me to show you guys. Hopefully I can, it's easier in person. But I'm gonna show you something that I didn't understand. It blew my mind the first time I saw it. And the last time I taught this class, the guy was like, whoa. So I'm really hyping it up. So hopefully it delivers. So our bodies, this is crazy. So you see shields typically that are like heater shaped where they have these corners, or you see like rounds, or you see variations between them. But let's really think about that. So why are there angles versus round parts on our shields, and how does that relate to our body? So I'm gonna take the tabard off. You ready? You ready? Ready? Don't judge me too heavily. The thing is, our bodies are made up of a series of round parts and pointy parts. You guys can see, you can use my torso here, right? Or you can identify it on your own torsos. Can you guys give me some examples of some pointy parts of our body? Mainly torso area.
Shoulders.
Yeah, the point on the shoulder here is a pointy area, right? So if I'm using, I'm not gonna use that heater shield. That heater shield is too damn big. My shit. So if we have our shoulders here, there's a reason why this heater is shaped this way. It's because it covers our pointy part of our shoulder a little bit better, right? Now, these things are often made, and we'll get into it actually, but what are some round parts of our body? You guys want to identify some round parts of our body?
My stomach right now.
Those of us with a little extra,
This right here is a good round part.
A little extra in the carriage, a little extra on this side.
Yeah, think of a silhouettes. Our round parts of our bodies are going to, and we got two of them, so I'm going to go over the rest of them. Our round parts of our bodies are going to be, I forget what it's called. Somebody help me. What's this muscle called? Trap? I think that's it. Anyway, this part of our body is round on most people. It's rounder. This is a point, and there's going to be a pattern here, right? So round, point, round. I'm not as round right there on the bicep, but it's round. Points, right? Point of our elbows. Same thing with our sword on this side, but we're going to focus more on shield side. This is my shield side. Big round part right here, right? So you see round, point, round. So when we're identifying shields, we now know the target area that we can be potentially aiming for without seeing it behind the shield. So when you approach a shield, you can go, okay, this is a round shield. I really hope that you guys can see visibly. But this is a round shield, right? Which parts of my body is this round shield covering more than the other parts of my body that are pointed? You see the trap area here is more adequately, can you guys see me clear-ish?
Yeah.
Okay, is that better? All right, so the trap here is going to be more easily covered by the round part of the shield than the shoulder here, right, which is pointed and is actually closer to the end of my shield. Same thing with the point of the arm here is more the bicep is more adequately protected by a round shield than the elbow point. So when you're fighting me and you're trying to swing at your opponent, especially in shields that can be moved easier, aim for these target areas that are points on a round shield. Does that make sense? So you can X-ray vision behind my shield right now, and I encourage all of you to X-ray vision every shield that you do from now on. Look at their body parts and how they are behind the shield, and now you'll be able to see that some are closer than others. And when you throw shots, like if I were to throw a shot, right, and my shield's in a static guard, am I aiming for the bicep here if it's one of the most protected areas on somebody's shield, right? So in this case, I would say if you're fighting someone using a coreless round shield, then aim for those pointed target areas. And in opposition, heater shield's actually neat because you can move them around a little bit if they're punches, but In opposition here, if I'm using a heater shield, now the parts of my body that become, use your x-ray vision, that become more easily accessible to being blown through by a shot, or the things that will become the quickest targets if somebody moves their shield away from their body, are now the parts of my body that are rounder. In this case, this is a little heater compared to my body, so my elbow is actually going to be available too. But if you look, my arm really isn't that far away from being hit. Does that make sense? So when you see someone with like a flat part here, it's not going to be protected as well by the round bit. You're going to be able to use your x-ray vision, and you're going to be able to see the round arm in this part of the shield. You guys picking up what I'm putting down? Yeah.
Yep.
And now also this part of the, I think it's called a trap. Let's just go with that. Your trap here is now more accessible because of this flat part, right? The round part of your arm or your shoulder is going to be the closest to the edge of the shield. Even if it doesn't look like it, you can swing and land target areas based on what your opponent's using. Because in this case, this is covering a lot of that shoulder point, right? So I would recommend not throwing for that shoulder point if you don't have a feint for it. Last bit. It's not really as much. I find that I use a round bottom punch heater. It's like my preferred shield shape. I kind of have that thing with Argent where it's not necessarily as common, but I like it for it. The reason why I use a round bottom heater is because it, like I said before, it allows me some more opportunities to follow my shield and get tighter, cleaner shots without having to worry about the corners. But what it does is it often allows my hips, which are round but kind of follow the round curve here, to be tagged. It's less likely a thing, honestly. I think that the edges of our heaters don't really follow the rules of the body points as much. At that point, it's more of a gauging whether or not your opponent has wider love handles. But that's just based on identifying. That's not based on anything. There's no anything that says somebody's got more love handles is going to be a better or worse fighter. That's not a hole that I'm willing to jump down. So we're at time. I'm willing to go a little bit further. You guys want to go a little bit further?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions so far? No, I'm about it. Let's go. Okay. Strapping. Wait, briefly talk about range, short, high. Oh, okay. Let's talk about Argent and your Wankle. So let's
I'll go
identify,
grab it.
right?
I'll go grab it.
Yeah, grab it. So Wankle actually have a shield that's similar, but not quite like Argent's. It's right here. It's got a similar reason why it's got this very large point. I've heard these.
Those are covers, so don't judge me too much.
No worries.
It's like a rounded triangle.
I like it.
So typically, yeah, this would be. So you have this like 2-3 inch extra above where the points would meet on a triangle. But yeah, it's rounded out.
Yeah, I think it's really cool because it definitely addresses some of the concerns with a Wankle, for sure. I actually brought out my closest thing I have to a Wankle, which is like I've heard you referred to as a cheater heater. I think that's kind of a shitty thing to call it, but
dude, I have heaters. I have a shit ton of heaters. That's mainly what I've been using the last few years.
Similarly to
I don't call them cheater heaters.
No, okay. So the reason why I'm referring to that is how I've been called is because this shield specifically has a very large winged point.
Oh, okay, I get you.
I don't like that terminology. I don't know.
I don't say that because how I strap my heaters and my wankles, I'm essentially doing that.
Yeah, and that's why
I'm giving me a lot of extra shoulder coverage because. So, like, are you gonna go over height differences? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll just keep my mouth shut then.
No, it's okay. It's okay because there's a reason why this works, and it's actually a very similar philosophy that I hold, or the reasoning why this shield is strapped the way it is, because this is my downstick shields. Right?
Well, that's so like a wankle. I think a wankle is kind of it's like a nice mix of a low strap round
Mhm.
and a heater. So you have the low strap round, which gives you the extra shoulder coverage, but then you have the points, like a
Mhm.
heater. Because that's essentially what this is. If you look at it, it's essentially just a heater, but just like equal. And I like the smaller ones. This is like 25. So
Interesting. You cut out, Argent. Sorry, bud. Oh man, can anyone else hear Argent?
No, his sound cut out.
We can't hear you, buddy.
all right, is it back now?
Yes.
Now it's back. Yes.
Okay. Where would I leave at?
You were talking about how it's a combination of a heater and a kind of a round.
Yeah, like a low strap round specifically. So, what
Go ahead, Arjun.
I was also going to say, I think of a wankle. It's kind of, you use it more like a punch blocking wise, because you have a lot more since it's smaller, you have to be more active, and the points help. So typically this is my stance. And so, you guys see that? So where am I weak at most right here? What can you hit?
Sword side hip.
Sword side hip and
Belly.
sword side shoulder.
Yeah.
And so, but I'm also a short fighter. So a lot of times I'm crouching on people. And so I'll have my sword up in a higher guard. Because if they want to go low, taller people specifically, they have to go down more. Which, if I just want to block a low shot, I just crouch. And then that's when I can go in and pretty much, you see how I put it across me? Because that's where their sword's going to be at. And so I'm pressing up as I'm doing it. And then I'm just, if they're a righty, I'm going for that shoulder. A lot of times, if it's a lefty, I'll do that. But then I'll switch, because then I could hook them and spin them. So there's a little bit, you can do the same thing to a lefty. There's just a little bit more to it. You have to do the switch to your weapon. And that's a big part of my fighting style, is restricting your weapon from hitting me, because I'm short. And so typically I'm going to be at a range disadvantage regardless. And then I do that even further because I like 30-inch swords. So in order to compensate for that, I try to prevent your weapon from hitting me. And that's either by throwing it to put my weapon in the way as I'm aggressing, or pinning your weapon. And I could do that with my sword and shield. And a lot of times they use a down stick as well. So a lot of times I can just whack it.
I find that you've actually put yourself in a very interesting situation. It's almost like, so based on your shield design and down stick, you kind of set yourself up, especially in combination to you being shorter. I don't know how tall you are, and I'm 5'8". I'm fighting a lot of tall fighters.
I'm 5'6", so I'm on the short end.
It sounds like you put yourself in a situation. You guys are following along here. Argent's shield has a lot of coverage over his shoulder, but he's also finding himself in a situation where his active target area for his opponents are his shoulders, especially when he dips down and he gets close to them, paired with his height. This is definitely an important part about understanding your style and using what you're good at, because your shield type and your sword type, in this case being a short shield, has definitely adapted to a strategy that you're using, and you're making it very effectively. It's almost like you're doubling down, and not in a bad way, on a tactic, and it is successful, or more so successful than if you were to do it with a different weapon type, like a large.
I definitely prefer down sticking with that and doing the a lot more aggressive style than like with my other shields. Like if I use a low strap round, that's like the other thing too. Like, so I have like the shoulder coverage of a low strap round, but if this were a round, there would be all this right here.
Excessive.
There'd be all this extra right here. But I cut away all the stuff that I don't want. I keep what I need, which is that shoulder coverage. So this leaves my weapon open. That's another thing I like about the Wankle is I have a more shot selection because this is not in my way. Because that's kind of the problem. That's what I don't like about low strap rounds is the top of the shield gets in my way a lot. But I do like the shoulder coverage, and
I definitely hear that. I
Yeah.
am not a fan because I often find in order to swing, I either have to be fighting from like sword foot forward in a lot of cases in order to get deep, but then it definitely leaves my hips a lot open or my low hip on the other side. Or I often find myself with my shield way over here where it's not actually being helpful in that case. However, and I like to chime in with the downstick part for those of you guys watching and listening. I think it's a very interesting thing that downstick is paired very well with these sets, similarly to my low strap round. Because you're
that's
putting
how I originally learned how to downstick was the low strap round, and then
Yeah.
I found the wankle, and I'm just like, whoa, and they kind of like,
it's a good pairing, honestly,
Yeah.
because often with downstick, you'll be able to get them at a position. And I'll show you an example of this, why this works really well. If I'm downstick, if I'm using a downstick, and Arjun, I'm sure you can attest to this, if you put yourself in a situation where you have blocked this heavy block up here, your shot is already cranked.
yeah, I like those. I like it when I kind of always refer to it as they're setting it up for me. So
Yeah, so too. So it's definitely that shield type and that weapon type, the downstick, has definitely a 1 second train has definitely kind of they grow with each other and they go to a specific style. So if you can identify these things, remember that this is potentially what they're going to swing at you with the most success on you based on their kit. So identify it, and in that case, try not to let them do the thing. That's easier said than done, but the first step is understanding that they're capable of doing that and they have an advantage when they're doing that. Arjun, I'm going to pause really quick. I really appreciate the convo about it. Thank you, Orn, for coming. I don't know if you already left, but I appreciate you coming. And Train, go ahead and ask a question. You have the mic.
So as someone with a disability, I can't really fight front lines, but I do arch. And
Okay.
I've heard of archers using using shields. I've seen archers with back shields, but the concern that has come up when I've discussed safety options with friends is that a back shield encourages people to aim for the shield and try to break it with a red. What are what's the practicality of shields for archers, and especially with people with head injuries?
I really appreciate the question. I'm not prepped for the question, but
Sorry.
when I arch, I often arch at events where I know they're going to be lengthy. At Chaos Wars, I arch pretty much the whole time, and I enjoy the hell of it. I use a back shield when I arch. I use this one. Dropping shields. I use this one. It's square and it's round on certain areas, and it grants me hip protection. To answer your question, as far as like if people are going to like red shot you on shields, so I hate to have this as an option, but as a fighter who has a disability, most of the fields and most people will respect if, as you're being approached in a fight, if you do call dead. And I'm not saying that that's the way to go, but I think that the better way to go here is for a less large field situation, you can talk to the members that are fighting alongside you and remind them that you're the situation that you're in, which is,
Yeah, I usually do call dead before people.
Oh, sorry. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to play. So if you communicate with the heralds and as you communicate, and if I'm there too, I help you out too, because I definitely feel as if Belegarth should be able to cater to the players that are on the field. And if you are feeling like you are unsafe while being on the field, then the herald should be able to accommodate. Go ahead, Train.
Yeah, I do normally call dead like long before people can get to me, but ironically at Chaos Wars, people seemed to not hear it until way too late, and they would swing pretty hard. But like, I was more thinking of it as a theory crafting idea, because I don't plan on taking to the field with a shield, but like, as archers, like, do the shields have any real practicality to them if you not have a backup weapon?
Yes, I say 110% yes. You can turtle shell very easily. Have you ever met Kygo? Or his name is Kyle Wilson. He's a relative of mine, and he's been out to I think some of the events that you've at, and he's arched. He uses a very large plastic turtle shell shield, and he like quite literally, well, let's say you don't know, he turtle shells into his shield, and it's a very, very beneficial tactic to him, especially if he's not planning on running around very much, because whether it's a time to reload, or if you see another archer targeting you and you just turn your back really quick, the archer is going to use their time wisely and move on to another target. I find using a back shield increases my survivability tons and tons. I actually give you a very quick anecdote. There was another player at Chaos Wars who is a much better archer than I am. And I was getting him a bunch. And every time he'd try to swing at me, because we would pay attention to each other, and I would turn my back around and he'd be like, God, what is he gonna do? He's gonna shoot me in the leg, and I'm just gonna turn around and I'm gonna shoot him right back, right? So I would say yes, absolutely. There's tons of practicality to using a back shield. And I would love to have more conversation with you. Very similarly to the what we talked about today on shapes of back shields and how they can be an advantage. I also think that there's lots of notable back shield users out there, and to look at their back shields are really interesting. And I'd love to break it down in another conversation, because it's definitely something that I'm interested in, and I definitely would say yes, from just a pure practicality usage. A back shield and an archer in a large field setting is very, very helpful.
Thank you so much.
Is
Go ahead.
your disability related to your back, or
I had a traumatic brain injury years and years ago, but I am super prone to getting concussions. If I just get knocked the wrong direction, or not the wrong, if I get knocked a little bit too hard on the back, I can get whiplash real fast.
do you know who Jesus is? Have you ever talked?
I thought that was a joke. No, I'm sorry.
Oh, there's a fighter called Jesus from Iowa, and he is in a very similar circumstance, and he wears a helmet to prevent that, because this happened in Bellegarth, unfortunately, but in a fight, he got 2 solid hits to the head. I think he got hit, and then he got knocked down, and then someone landed on his head with their full body weight. And so he has to worry about head injuries and such, but he protects himself up. So he'd be a good person to talk to. That's somebody I would recommend, because he's in a similar circumstances as you when it comes to that. So he'd be a good person. And he comes out on the field, and he's been doing that the last few years, I think. He took a break for a while, but yeah, he's been back full force. So he'd be a good person to talk to. That's who I'd recommend. His real name is, I think he's just Jesus Horde on Facebook.
Yeah,
I also train, if you know Sir Shadowzen.
Yeah, I've talked with Shadowzen about fighting with
Okay.
disabilities a lot, but his answer is to either fight, just keep fighting, or not fight. Though he is starting to reapproach that recently, because he's realized it's not sustainable.
Hey, honestly, it's a tough one too, because I've actually spoke to Shadowzen about this, and I respect him a lot. I've seen him or heard him speak pretty plainly about that in what you just described. The truth is we're simulating, and this conversation, this is a topic or a comment I would say on anybody critiquing any weapons on whether or not it's being dangerous, is that we're simulating combat and violence. And when we are we're actively simulating combat, right? When we are doing that, there is always going to be a level of potential risk and danger associated with those. Like I said before, I feel as if the coordinators should be able to accommodate as best as they ability, but it is also up to you, train, on whether or not you feel as if the accommodations given are adequate to you, and that's a safe decision, which you know it's on you. But yeah, we should actually. I'd love to talk to you more about this, especially in regards to shield shapes or back shields in the future. Thank you for the question.
Yeah.
So we have more to. I don't know how much more we have to talk about as far as shields. This is a really large topic, really, when you get into all of the different variations of shields and how you're going to approach this. Let's just go to open questions. If anybody has any questions for me, or maybe some comments related to the topic or slightly related to the topic that they would like to tell us about. or I'll just keep talking. I'll figure something out. As long as you guys are giving me a platform to talk.
Don't you have to go somewhere at 9?
I do, but it's just PvP on Elder Scrolls. I'll do it tomorrow. And plus, I'm really enjoying this conversation. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I didn't mention it, but I should have. I fight alongside of a lot of fighters who are very athletic. They're all very tall. A lot of them, huh?
Cardio says.
Yeah, a lot of them can outrun me for days and days and days, and I give up half the time. I'm not like a physically talented person when it comes to sports ever. And a strategy that I've used is stuff like this: is instead of trying to outskill or out athletically perform the opponent, I try to analyze the fights as much as possible. And that's something that I encourage. I want more people to do. I'm sure you guys all do it to a certain level, but developing a fight computer is important, and being able to identify these things in order to better approach them, especially if you come from a disadvantage to the fighter in front of you athletically, is definitely going to help you out. So thank you guys all for listening to me about this. It is definitely something I'm passionate about. I have a question. Does anybody want, I'll kit up real quick, and then does anyone want to break me apart and see if you guys can tell me what I feel would be, or based on the information given in the class, what's the best way to approach my opponent? You guys want to do that? I got a bunch of gear back there.
Okay.
I'm down.
Yeah? All right. All right. Give me 1 second. I got to dress up real quick. All right, let's use a dramatic example.
Ball and ball.
Little kids. Where's my little? We need more small swords in this house. A lot of people outrange us.
Small swords, best sword.
Little round punch shield, 24-inch round punch shield, and let's say in this case it's a 30-inch back. Take me apart. Who wants to go first?
I see you're holding a round shield, so it's going to be easier to go for the pointy bits.
Like my shoulder here, or
Shoulder, elbows.
if we look at here, especially in this position here, I'm baiting my shoulder a little bit, right? I'm baiting my shoulder a little bit, right? But I'm not quite baiting. It's hard to tell, especially from the angle. But I'm baiting my shoulder a little bit, but I'm not quite baiting my arm. Is there any additional points you guys want to make? Doesn't have to be about that specifically, but in this case, how to approach me.
Am I still connected?
Go for it.
Oh, you like froze up on me.
Oh. Am I still?
There you are. You're back.
Okay. So go for it.
Like what would I do?
Yeah. What would you feel is a good approach to this weapon type?
Well, I'd probably either feint to your sword side or blade beat your sword. And so, yeah, you would shift your defense over, and then I'd probably flat wrap you in the shoulder or arm, or if I crescent stepped enough around you as I'm doing this, yeah, and I'd probably be trying to crescent step you and I'd probably hack at your back. I don't really do wraps much anymore. I'm a lot more choppy.
No, that's good. That sounds.
I like single side short swords.
You utilized a feint. You used a body feint. In that situation. So the body feint is a feint, really just as much as the sword feint, but you're using your whole body for it. I'm a big fan of the body feint to the flat wrap this way, especially on heaters, which is an often thing I fight. But yeah, a body feint is also a good way. Well, get the whole body involved on their part, but
I think body feints are more believable.
I think so too.
Especially like with experienced people, because like I think once you get experienced enough, you don't really fall for like the first initial shot, which a lot of times is like a feint. So you're usually seeing one shot and kind of thinking where they'll go after that. And so you usually have that protected. But body feints, I think, are more believable personally. And so I do a lot more body feints than I do arm. Like feints. I'll do like maybe like a little hand juke on someone if I feel like, especially if they're newer, because I can do that. And then a lot of times then I can just drop into a shoulder shot. So
Yeah,
experience level matters.
And that's definitely part of it too. I have a secondary portion of this course where we talk about how to identify someone's experience level if you've never met them, which is more subjective and based on things you can see based on investment of time or money into their kits, how pretty they are versus if they're like loaner gear, and how to identify based on their body types and body sizes. This definitely goes down into the basic principle of rock, paper, scissors. You know, this guy's got to stir scissors, you know, I got to throw a rock. But being able to identify these things is definitely going to help. I encourage everybody to look at their opponent more often. And instead of defaulting to maybe the thing that you do the best, look at your opponent and say, well, these are where I think their disadvantages are, and I can see if I can try to exploit them without leaving myself as open, potentially. That's not to say that every time that you do the thing that you like to do is wrong. I'm just saying the more you practice and level up shots that maybe you're not used to, but have the advantage in the situation based on their weapon type, you'll be able to get some more XP points and be able to throw them potentially safer. I'm feeling, okay, so we're talking about the small shield really quick, and you actually utilize a body feint, which I think is a fantastic feint, but it's still a feint in order to move the shield, and which has a disadvantage because, well, not just because, but especially because it's, wow, a really small shield. I definitely have to worry about this over here, right? Especially if you're stepping in over here, or if you're coming over here, definitely have to worry about this block because I don't really have much to protect myself here. So definitely a feint, and you're taking advantage of in this case, if I'm that far away, you really have free pickings on me.
I would also like to kind of
go for it.
That's probably like a 36-inch bat too, right?
Yeah, in this case, let's call it.
Yeah, I didn't include that in my answer.
Go for it.
So I'd probably actually throw a short cross to your sword as I'm getting to you, because if I just did what I said from outside your range, you could probably just whack me, if you know what I'm trying to do, before I have the chance to even get to you. And so that's something I'll do with people that have range on me. I'll do a short cross to in front of their sword, because that prevents them from swinging at me as I'm going up to them. So, but yeah, with a shorter sword, I could be closer and probably feel more comfortable doing the body feint.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so let's say I've got let's pull out different shield type. This shield is a round shield. Firstly, I know I just showed you, but what ways can we identify whether or not this is going to be a punch or a strap shield? It covers a lot of my body.
The angle you're holding it.
That's a great way. In fact, I actually think that this is a giveaway a lot of times when people put stuff on their shield, that if you see it angled like that, that's where the core is probably going to be. And actually is going to even require more depth. That it's going to require a little bit of a flick from their wrists in order to more adequately protect that. So if you can get them occupied, that's going to be even more so open. That's aside the point. But great observation. Yeah, the angle of this is going to be a dead giveaway on the fact that this is core. Well, the core in this case is the handle. What are other ways we can identify this shield? No, I'll go. So it's very clearly plastidip, right? So at the bare minimum, so we know it's a punch shield, right? And we know it's plastidip. It doesn't have a traditional cover, right? So elements of plastidip, they typically, if you look at them, they're going to be using denser EVA foam. I talked about that, which is going to add to the weight of the shield, as well as the plastidip itself, the seal, and the paint add to the weight of the shield. So we can identify that this shield weighs a little bit more than your traditional coreless shield. Which means that it's not going to be as easy to blow through these guards. So if you're trying to take shots, or maybe you're going to rely on being able to tag through, I would recommend in this case setting yourself up a little bit more before throwing an easy, powerful shot. But yeah, that's something we can identify, that this is doesn't move as easy, right? What about size? Is there an approach that I'm going to take to the shield based on size? I'll go. It's about average on me. It's about a 28. I think this one's actually maybe a little larger. It's gonna be like a 29. But given that this shield is gonna be kind of like more of an average shape for somebody, you can also identify this. I don't know if I covered this, but if you approach them and you can't see much of their body, it doesn't matter how big the shield is, it's by comparison to them. So in this case, if they don't have much covered, there isn't as much of a need to feint them, because they don't necessarily need to feint in order to get the, or they don't need to bite in order to get the block. They can literally just keep it. So if it's a case where you just can't see anything on your opponent, baiting or stepping away from them to see if they move away or they pull it away from their body as they move towards you, or as they throw a shot, is going to see where on their body they're going to open it up. So in this case, you could approach by baiting yourself in whatever target area you want and seeing how your opponent opens up based on that. Because this might be their passive guard all the time. I know a lot of people that use punch shields that they'll just keep it right on the torso, right here. Especially the taller folks. Especially if it's a positive shield, because it doesn't move as often. So this can be another difficult. But I love that comment about the angle based on their shield design. So yeah, when you're approaching this fight, see, this sword I'm using is interesting. Can we identify the sword and what I might be doing with it? You want to break it down? Does this sword look light?
Flat blade. A hafted flat blade.
Yeah, this is a hafted flat blade. Can anybody tell me whether or not they think that this sword is light or heavy? I'll give you a second to look at it.
Super light.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are reasons why you think that this sword would be light?
The half padding below the blade.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one too, because I actually feel oftentimes when people haft, they do it because they're trying to cut down on weight. But I feel like a lot of the time people just throw a bunch of tape on it anyway. It ends up being about the same weight as it would be if it had a blade on it. I'm not saying you're wrong, because I definitely think that that's an identifying factor that people do in order to cut down on the weight, is to add half padding. But an additional signifier here is the fact that they've just used duct tape for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Duct tape is predicted, and this is getting more into weapon construction, but duct tape isn't necessarily known for being very light if you add it to weapons, especially in this case. I'm hearing this, and I think that this is kind of like right in the middle, but I definitely wanted you guys to break these things down. So yeah, I think this is kind of a toss-up here.
So
but
wait,
if you were,
saying it's like 16 or something?
yeah, I think it's about that. It's a
Okay.
little tip heavy too, but you can actually. I'll try to.
How long is it?
About 32.
32?
I'd say about 32. But if I were to throw this, I'm trying to. Yeah, so I know it's hard for me to tell, maybe because it's slow. But like I said before, I actually kind of have to drag back on this. So if you notice, as I throw and your opponent drags back their weapon like this, that this is likely going to be a little tip heavy. Remember we talked about that a little bit? Versus this, if I were to throw, and my return speed typically comes right back. I'm trying to fake this. This drags a little bit. But yeah, it's a little tip heavy. It's a little top heavy. I like the identifying factor as the duct tape, that it's heavier. But also because of the half padding, we can also kind of say that maybe there might be a little heavier weight in the sword here, which means that if we throw, we might want to compensate a little bit more for the guard. Maybe blow through their guard a little bit more, get them to feint out so they're not just straight blocking your sword. That's to say, assuming that you think your sword is lighter than this sword. If your sword is heavier, if you've got a particular heavy arm, you might just have a golden swing that can, hit through right about anything. But that might not always be the case. So definitely consider that. Similar approach to this one, we have our points on our body, which are available here. Yeah. We didn't talk about very much, which actually I think is a cool way to identify based on weapons, is where your opponent is holding their weapon at, which I think is a big one. If you can tell your opponent is choking up on their sword, what they're doing is they're shortening that lever that we talked about before. They're also creating more of a defensive ability here. So you might actually find that someone might be doing something similar to Argent. I bet Argent, do you choke up on your sword a little bit?
I do if I know I'm going to be, if I'm fully committing to fighting them close. But I'll go grab my typical.
Yeah, so Argent's checking. The thing I'm touching on here is that if you see that your opponent is shifting their sword closer and closer towards the middle part of the weapon, what they're doing is they're actually prepping to shorten the lever and close the distance by having a little additional defense. So if you notice that, be prepared for them to either close in. You can maybe close in on them first, or just be aware that that step might be a heavy body feint, like at Argent had said it before. But definitely something to be aware of. And the opposite is, go ahead, Argent, before I touch on the next one.
So I typically hold about here and I 45. So I do the flat wrap is essentially the shot I'm just doing all the time. And so but I just like it because it's easy to chop legs because you don't have to like turn your body to, you just throw it. And since you already have it at that orientation, it's just going to go right into the leg. But I also, like you said, this gives you a little bit more defense. And so that's really nice if you're coming up on someone and they want, especially like, as I said, I'm usually weak down here at the hip. And so this helps like compensate that a little bit, protecting that, because I can just shift it down. A lot of times my hand will block it. So yeah, if I'm fighting from far away at first, I will go down the 2 inches because it doesn't hurt. But if I'm fully committed to fighting someone like up close, I'll go up here. And plus, it's just nice because then I'm on the blade, and so it just stays there, and it's a lot more secure as well. So
make a point of identifying kind of the opposite. So I pommel fight the hell out of this sword a lot of the times. I mean, you can see where my grips are. They're either right.
Oh, dude, if you give me a 36-inch, 12-ounce bat, yeah, I'll pommel fight with it too.
And you see how that is. I know there's a light right there. It's awful. But to identify this shield, this pommel, and you'll see it often in people who pommel fights pommels. They end up getting real tapered. But they might be design tapered as well. But they'll shorten them out down here. So this is like a comfortable thing. You know what I mean? It's very much in contrast to choking up here.
You're getting the maximum length of the weapon, which
absolutely
never hurts. Yeah.
So if you notice that your opponent is doing something like this might be an opportunity for you to change the range on them, because it seems as if at this point, if you can see your opponent is doing something like this, they feel that they're likely max ranging you, or at least ranging you where they're comfortable, and they don't have to change things up. Because the opposite of being able to use this extra defense here is that extra defense goes away a lot. And even when you pull down, you have less of a defense. This is a little deeper, but based on where the weight of the sword is and how it's positioned, it's harder to have control of the sword when you're holding the very, very bottom of it. So not only is it that, but yeah, you have more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Control. You have more control over the sword itself. So if you see that your opponent's doing this, a target area that you might want to aim for is something like their sword side hip or their sword side arm or elbow, because it's going to take them a lot of time to either get out of the way or put their sword in a position where they can actually defend adequately. And oftentimes I found that this is more of a stance where people will step out of the way versus actually sword blocking. So something like closing off their sword by mid-rep, or I call it it's typically called a mid-cross where I'm fighting. I think you might have coined it something different, Argent. Just like
I called it a short cross.
Yeah.
So because you're not going fully for the shoulder, you're just kind of doing half of the movement.
Yeah. Locally, I've heard it called. I'm not saying you're wrong, because that's the beauty of things and what they're called.
Yeah.
We'll call it crazy things. They call them mid cross typically. Where
mid cross.
Center cross, and it's typically not to actually hit something.
Yeah.
I often actually just call it the get the fuck away from me shot, because it's a very good either closing distance or
which is funny because I do it to get in people's faces. It's more of a get over here shot to me.
I love that shot because it's you can use it to, you basically create space, so you can use it here and then press in. Obviously, You can either do that here backing up or here closing up. And that's the thing, is if you can find yourself where somebody's fighting like this, the center cross might actually be very beneficial to you because they have less control over their sword than you might have over their sword by striking it. So definitely a way to approach is if you can identify that your opponent is holding their sword in different positions.
And with the center cross, if you're going to do it to tie up their equipment, go up above their hand when you do it. Don't go right on their hand, because if you just go right on their hand, they're still able to do stuff to you.
You're giving them a better lever now. They actually, they can just use the point.
Yeah, they could just
at their hand.
Whoop.
Exactly.
Yeah, and they're using your blade to just pivot off of.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of my favorite shots as a mid cross. Honestly, I never think about it because it's more of just like a support shot, I feel, than it is a I land stuff shot.
I'll do it like after I shield hook someone's shoulder open. I essentially just do it right on the chest. That's what's nice about the short weapons is I'm gonna hit chest at that like range. I don't know what you guys call it. I always call it like a scorpion.
Scorpion. Well, so I often see the scorpion as like over the shoulder, like shield shot, but it's the same thing. You're just doing the arm per cross. I like that. Oh man, I could talk shots for days. I miss fighting so much. Arjun, I'm sure you feel it too. There's tons of different ways you can set up based on what you can identify on your opponent. Does anybody have any questions based? Hello, welcome. I don't think there's any more classes after this, but if you're here for my class, it's kind of over, but we're still talking. So the class was about analyzing swords and shields in our game and how you can identify your opponent's weaknesses as well as understand your advantages based on your equipment. I'm not going to. Thank you. Thank you for attending, Queenie. Definitely appreciated the audience. I'm glad you guys came out and I hope you guys learned something. Thank you. So you want to talk about sword fighting, Arjun?
Sure, I'm down.
About it. I'm thinking that cross that you just, or the one that's kind of like over.
Before you,
Go
do you want me to continue recording or do you want me to stop the recording?
You can stop the recording now. Thank you so much, Amen, Alina. I appreciate it a lot.
Stay around for special commentary after the show.